Just going to wait about 2 more minutes and we'll get started. Okay, we will call the meeting to order. Thank you for coming tonight, and thank you to my trustees for being here. Please note for the record that the board convened an executive session to consider discussions regarding proposed, pending, or current litigation, matters leading to the employment of a particular person, and collective negotiations pursuant to Article 14 of the Civil Service Law, the Taylor Law. We always start our meetings with the pledge, but before we do, I just wanted to make a comment as a lead-in to the pledge. I hope everyone had a great break. I had a great break. And I was lucky enough to be away with other families from the district, with our kids who are ranging from about, I guess, 11 to 17. And so I got to spend a lot of time with kids from our district who weren't my own, including one who is a senior and knows where he's going to college. And hearing them and talking to them about their experiences and about what they're going to be doing either in North Shore or afterwards was really contrasted to what we saw unfold globally during that same week. And thinking about kids that same age in the Ukraine who were having their existence as a country questioned. 500,000 refugees were picking up everything they had and leaving. People who are going to be conscripted to fight, and even these kids in Russia who are 17 or 18 who are being forced to fight for this totalitarian despot who's going to force them to put their lives in the line for no good reason. It really was a contrast, and I just thought about it in preparing for the night tonight and thinking about the flag that we're about to pledge our allegiance to with gratitude. So I will ask everyone to please stand up and recite the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We will now move on to approval of our minutes from February 17th. Is there a motion? And a second? Thank you. Any questions or discussion? All in favor? Aye. The approval of our treasurer's report from January of 2022. Is there a motion?
Motion.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Okay, questions or comments? Yep, Trustee Mosca?
Yeah.
And I'm just going to ask you and everyone else, put that mic pointing at you and directly.
Hello.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Just a quick note, because it's been one of the things that I asked about a few months ago in my learning process about how we are on treasurer's report, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry. About how we dispose of old equipment. And I just, right there on page 1, thought it was interesting to note that we auctioned off a 1990 Ford truck and got $3,300 for it. So that was just really nice, coming full circle, understanding what we do when we're approving the disposal of old equipment. Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments on the treasurer's report? All right. All in favor of its approval? Aye. Action 5, which is the approval of budget transfers in the amount of $56,722. Is there a motion? Thank you. And a second? I think I heard. Okay. Questions or comments? All right. All in favor? Aye. Item 6, acceptance of the claims audit report for January. Is there a motion?
Motion.
And I heard a second as well. Any questions or comments?
This is the one that had no exceptions?
Zero.
Am I remembering correctly?
5.4 million, if I remember. Yep. That means, I actually made a note on this. 289 checks for $5.4 million, zero exceptions. That means the auditors found not a penny off and not a error in them in the whole bunch. Olivia, thank you, as usual. We're gonna
Thank the business office first, please.
yeah, the whole business office. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Item 7, which is the report of our superintendent, Dr. Dolan.
Thank you, Dave. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the March 3rd meeting of the Board of Education. We have now entered a mask-optional environment, and I am pleased to report to the board and the community that our students and staff have responded well. We continue to work with everyone to adapt to this change, and I am certain that there will be some unanticipated challenges ahead of us, but we will confront and conquer them as well. I also assure the community that we will continue to be vigilant in addressing issues where anyone is not tolerant of others, and that will include students as well as adults. All matters brought to my attention have been and will be addressed. More significantly, I have seen some wonderful things in our schools in the last 48 hours, and there is a sense of hope and even joy that I hope that we can capture and use as we move through the rest of the school year. I do want to remind everyone that there are still certain regulations in place that will address a student or a staff person who tests positive for COVID. Our reaction when this occurs, which might include brief periods of quarantine, and even that individual wearing a mask for a few days upon return, are designed to prevent us from any new outbreaks and will increase the probability of a mask-optional environment continuing. I thank the principals and assistant principals for their continued vigilance and ask you to please accept their phone calls, knowing that they are only trying to keep everyone safe. Consistent with our slow return to normal, our parent-teacher conferences will be held and will be in a live format. I'm thrilled to be able to welcome parents back into our buildings, and I hope to see many of you there. Please review my letter that went out yesterday that offered some details on the event. I also thank the Federation again for working with the district on moving forward in this and other initiatives. Also, keep your eyes peeled for our high school musical, Hello Dolly, scheduled for March 18th and 19th. I hope that everyone will purchase a ticket. After all, it only takes a moment, and then you can all put on your Sunday clothes and join in the dancing before the parade passes by. 4 songs. Okay, that was 4 songs from Hello Dolly, all right? Tickets go on sale. I look forward to it. Please be there. You'll enjoy it.
Date the tickets go on sale?
Tickets will go on sale on Monday, and the event is March 18th and 19th. 3 performances. Allow me to share a quick story before I give you the next update. Jen Imperial had not even unpacked her first box when she received word that the middle school's School to Watch designation was about to expire. She then learned that a lengthy application was in her inbox and needed to be completed immediately. In fact, it was already late. As I recall, the Imperial household celebrated Labor Day by watching Jen pull together resources and learn about the school that she was now responsible for. Well, evidently it was time well spent, because today, Jen learned that her application has been approved, and we will now receive a virtual school visit as the next step in claiming that important designation from the New York State Middle School Association. Thank you to the entire middle school for doing the kind of work that culminates in such a visit, and thank you to the middle school for giving Jen the data she needed to include in her report. And thank you to interim principal Imperial for completing the application and caring for the middle school as she has. The last few meetings, I broadcast some very, very good athletic news, and this winter season was certainly a remarkable one. But tonight, I'd like to look at another aspect of student life, and those are our clubs and activities. We are fortunate to have a coordinator of extracurricular activities in Jen Lamar. Jen? Sarah. I don't know why I said that, and I had no first name there. Thank you. And Sarah Lamar. About to read her email. I would have seen it then. Thank you. We are fortunate to have her. In addition to having big shoes to fill in that capacity, thank you, Trustee Galati, she is also an excellent physics teacher, and I've enjoyed my conversations with her very much. I asked her for some data that I could share with our clubs, and her email was so good that I think it best just to read it to you from Sarah Lamar. Sorry, Sarah. I used the information from the mid-year report, so please feel free to add to this. It was hard to highlight just a few. Let me pause there and just point out. The mid-year report that she's referencing is that each and every club is obligated to hand a report at the middle of the year identifying what they've done and attendance, whether or not people have been attending the club, what their activities have been, a little bit of a brag sheet. But we do monitor these clubs, and we monitor them carefully. And I know that Jen is punctilious about making sure that these all get handed in, because ultimately she does have the opportunity to say to them that they're not getting paid as the advisor if they do not do the appropriate paperwork. So good for her that she does that. Thank you, Sarah. In the 2021-22 school year, the extracurricular program has been able to offer students in the North Shore schools even more opportunities. Rebounding from 88 clubs and organizations, there are now 129 clubs meeting throughout our schools. While many clubs have been able to return to their status, we've also been able to add opportunities for students, including a coding club, a mindfulness club, and a group that focuses on race, education, and discussion. Music has returned to our halls, and ensemble meetings before and after school at both the middle and high school master programs have returned to the stage. The High School Environmental Club educated the high school about the influences of the meat industry on the environment and advocated for Meatless Monday, which now runs in the cafeteria. Students have been able to reconnect in person this school year through opportunities like Middle School Dungeons and Dragons Club, the High School Chess Club, and the High School Gamers Club. They've participated in weekly competitions and connected with other schools to expand their networks. Community service is a common thread from the high schools through the elementary schools. Service clubs in all the schools have run drives to donate to the local community. Toy drives, food drives, coat drives run by the Glen Head Community Service Club, Middle School Builders Club, and High School Interacting Key Club have brought much aid to those in need in our community. From Design Squad at the elementary schools to the Lego Robotics program in our middle school to the first robotics program in the high school, our students are surrounded by opportunities to participate in STEM. Students are problem solving through coding, designing, and machining, and our robotics programs will compete with their final designs later this spring. And when I say first robotics club, it's not our first robotics club. We've had a robotics club for quite a while. FIRST is an acronym for the organization that runs those competitions. And I believe they're taking part in another competition before this year is over. Kindergarten registration continues, and we are about at the same level as we were in previous years with 72 total registrants. That's a little behind the last 2 years, but ahead of the year before that. If you are aware of a family with a kindergarten eligible student, please implore them to register now such that we can plan appropriately. Finally, as there will be a budget discussion tonight, I want to remind everyone of where we are in the budget process. We are still engaged in developing a document that will be brought to the board on March 24th for their adoption. For now, it remains the superintendent's budget, and all I mean by that is that the board is deliberating these proposals right along with you. We need to hear from you as we develop this plan. I thank those of you that are here tonight, and those of you who are watching are also encouraged to weigh in on our proposals. As I've said before, this is an iterative process. What I've not said is that it is also a deliberative process, and we continue to factor in new considerations, and we do listen to what is being said. Our goal is to develop a document that enjoys broad support and that propels the district's mission forward. I thank the community and the board for the role that you play in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dolan. The next item on our agenda is an update on the superintendent search, which I will offer. As most of you know, Dr. Dolan has taken on the mantle of interim superintendent after our superintendent for the past 4 years moved on. And so we have been engaged in a process this year that is moving towards its conclusion on schedule. Next week, the board will be reviewing finalist candidates and proceeding with with interviews and moving towards an appointment that hopefully will occur mid-spring. That's the goal. I see no reason to say that we're not going to be on target with that. Next, we have the report from our student government representatives. I don't have them written down, but I believe it's Katie DeTrano and Noah Glickman. All right, there we go.
Correct.
All right, thank you guys.
Good evening, everyone, and it's finally nice to see some of you for the first time from underneath the masks. We hope you all had a safe and enjoyable February break. The SGO met earlier today to discuss our plans for the remainder of the school year. We sent out a survey to all class and SGO officers to determine what meeting dates and times work best in order to set our schedule of meetings for the rest of the year. And yes, it's hard to believe that this year is almost coming to a close. In the beginning half of the year, we planned meetings on a week-by-week basis to be as flexible as possible because of COVID. But now that things are mostly returning back to normal, we are returning to a more structured model. One thing I'd like to add is that tomorrow, the ski club will be going up to Smuggler's Notch Resort in Vermont for their overnight weekend ski trip. And this is the first trip that has happened since COVID, and we would like to thank the board on behalf of the ski club for actions that have been taken in order to make this trip possible.
On the topic of trips, we are pleased to report that our Latin students returned safely from their trip to Rome over February break. And from everything I've heard, they had an absolutely fantastic experience. So I'm sure they would all like to thank you as well for allowing that trip to happen. As for the SGO, we have tasked each class with brainstorming at least one idea for a project the SGO can sponsor, whether that be a fundraiser, sports tournament, or spirit event. And we're very excited to see what they come up with, especially some of our underclassmen. They tend to be very creative, so we're really excited to see what they can think of. The SGO is also hoping to plan a charity fundraising event that coincides with our St. Patrick's Day Spirit Day. This idea is in its very preliminary stages, but we're excited about the possibilities and hope to have a positive update about it at the next meeting.
Next week is World Language Week. The World Language Honor Society and the World Language teachers at the high school are working together to make this a great celebration with student-created posters, displays, announcements, projects, and more. The decorations are already starting to take over the hallways, so if you missed them on the way in, be sure to check them when you leave tonight. There was also a Super Commons today during school to discuss the senior fashion show, which is shaping up to be a great event as always.
5 members of the North Shore High School Band have been selected to perform as members of the New York State Band Directors Association Honor Band. Their rehearsals and performance will take place this weekend in Syracuse. I believe many of them are on their way there right now. So we congratulate them for that terrific accomplishment, and we hope they have an absolutely incredible experience. And finally, believe it or not, planning for Sports Night and Moving Up Day has already begun. The SGO is subsidizing the cost of Moving Up Day t-shirts, which will be designed by students and will be available in the 4 traditional grade level colors. Well, as Noah kind of mentioned before, it's certainly bittersweet for us as seniors, but we're very excited for all the fun things we have to look forward to during the second half of our senior year. Thank you all and have a good evening.
Thank you both. I just want to say you really both represent your class and yourselves really, really well up here. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. And we will now, yes, have a great night. We will now move on to the regular business portion of our meeting with the budget review. So I'll ask the trustees to choose the format that is most comfortable to you. I like the big book. And we will start with,
Wait,
oh, sure, please.
Before we do the page by page, I just
Yeah.
wanted to follow up with some information. Last meeting, we talked about the cost per student. Former trustee Vizza had posted on Facebook and had sent me the New York State data, New York State Education Department, the ESSA Financial Transparency Data Business Rules. And in that information, what they do is they exclude the expenditures that we were talking about, such as transportation, are excluded because districts are required to provide the transportation for non-public students. Since those students are not included in the enrollment counts, districts are not expected to disaggregate the transportation expenses by traditional public, non-public charter schools. Accordingly, all transportation services are excluded. Charter school enrollment is not included in the district enrollment figures, and these expenditures are excluded. Tuition for students attending other school districts, specialized schools for students with disability, or BOCES, full-time instructional programs, are excluded, again because enrollment is not included in the district totals. Debt service payments for bonds and other borrowing instruments that have been undertaken for capital projects and other purposes are excluded. Other expenditures include certain funds such as school food service fund and public library funds, plus services provided to non-public or charter schools and payments to community-based organizations for pre-kindergarten. If you go on New York State Education Department's data site, you could see a breakdown of every school in the state as to what their expenditures are, enrollment, achievements. It's actually quite an interesting website. It has ability to raise local funds, student need, student to teacher ratio. It's quite interesting. And looking at that data, you would get a better, they do provide a cost per student. And looking at our quadrant, Locust Valley, North Shore, Jericho, Cold Spring Harbor, Roslyn, Great Neck, Harrods, Manhasset, and Garden City, you can see the county average, the state average, and the cost per student. Locust Valley being in the highest, Garden City being in the lowest. We come up at the higher end. Manhasset and Garden City come up at the lower end. You'll see the breakdown and the comparison of where the costs are, such as administrative, expensive, and things of that nature. So it's interesting data. I printed out where I was reading from for Betty, and I do have the cost per students in sort of a grid. She could take that too if she wants to include it in the minutes. But I think it probably gives a fairer cost per student and accounts for those differentials that we said. And I guess it doesn't take into account some of the comparisons that we did. I mean, the reality is you could probably reduce student spending somewhere along the line. I don't think it would be possible to get down to what Manhasset student spending is without some very significant program cuts, increase in class size. I mean, that would be, a big discussion. But it's information for the community and for the board to have. It would be interesting, if there comes a time where decisions have to be made, maybe we could figure out where some savings might be and how other districts do it.
Thank you. I think that is a very, very helpful website. I'm familiar with it, and it's got a lot of good information on there. And so I guess if that link can be put in the minutes, that way we can have that as part of the part of the record. I think the opportunity and the process for looking for those savings is this extensive budget review that we've been doing for these last couple sessions, which is why we go through them page by page and section by section to identify areas where we're spending money inappropriately. And so if any trustees have those things when they go through this very detailed, very exhaustive and deep dive into those expenses, that's the time. I know one of the reasons that I first got into this is we were looking at the specter of a LIPA settlement several years ago, and former Superintendent Dr. Melnick convened the Superintendent's Council. Mary, I think you were on the board back then, back when he did that? Okay.
Yes, I was.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember that particular name. I don't remember that particular name. But
He had about 200 members of the community come in and gave them.
We did
yeah.
the tables.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yes,
It's
well,
when they did the tables, and they were trying to look for revenue as part of it. Also, that
and we had at least 200 members of the community come. That was the first time I ever attended any event to support the schools, to really get involved in the process. I shouldn't say to support the schools, but to get involved in the process. And we had 200 of the people in the community looking through them line by line to look for those efficiencies and find them. Because when you look through this budget, as we've been doing, and it's all on video, of course, as this one will be as well, it's being live streamed as well for folks who are here. The idea that there's these big pockets, no one in that 200 came out with them, and no one here has come up with them in a way that wouldn't affect student experience, right? And we can double our reason.
I would disagree with that, because you're talking about things like personnel that would not be appropriate to be discussing during a budget process. So the budget is presented with the numbers that we need to keep what we have, right? And there are some cuts that are made before the budget is presented. But if you're talking about, if you look at that data, we're on a very high side for administration. The only way to cut that number is to cut administrators, right?
That is a conclusion that I think is not accurate. We could close a school building. We could increase our class sizes. We could get rid of music. We can get rid of sports.
We could do a lot of different things.
So,
But-
so it's not
but
just
my
that one
point is,
solution.
it is not. I'm just
But
saying,
that was
as an
also not
example,
inclusive that
you
we're
could
hiring.
you could reduce costs by any number of those means, right? That is not the process of looking at the budget. The looking at the budget are the numbers presented reasonable and in line with what we have. If you want to talk about cuts, that's a bigger conversation. That's a bigger conversation. So I could sit here and say, okay, we could save $1 million cutting elementary plus, perhaps. I mean, I'm just making that up. But I'm just saying that you're not going to have, I'm not having a discussion about cutting programs in this budget review. That's a bigger discussion than are these numbers accurate and accurate for what we have.
With all due respect, I disagree with that estimation of this process. We sat here as a board for different sessions and talked about the future of AP, IB, and dual enrollment. That is a program that we discussed from a financial perspective. We discussed from an educational and student experience perspective, and we talked about different options of what we would do with that exhaustively in this room. That is something that we can discuss. The administration presents a budget to us, and their directive is their recommendation of what they think the community wants. And they believe the community wants us to preserve the program that has made North Shore so great and renowned and desirable for our kids' experiences, for our kids' outcomes, for the property values, for people who want to come here, work here, and live here. But I believe that anybody on this board or anybody out there who wants to be on this board, if their goal is to say that that cost is too expensive and we need to take a different approach, I would hope that you or anyone on this board would say very clearly, this is not sustainable and I disagree with these areas and we should go through it. It's not just going through and saying, well, you're spending $10,000 on copier leases and saying we should not have copiers anymore, or should it really be a different copier lease? It should also be an opportunity to look holistically at these different areas and say, I have been elected, either I or you or anyone else out there who does get elected, by the people of this community to make decisions about the future of this district based on my estimation of what the community wants as their representative. That's the nature of representative government, to be able to make those changes. And if there are things that people want to do, if people wanted to say, we've heard people at that podium in my time advocate for the closing of a school building. That would be a cost-saving maneuver. That is something that could be done. If someone who was elected to this board felt that that was the right decision for this district and didn't say it, I would argue that they're not fulfilling their responsibility.
Well, let's just go back and say, how many times have I made certain suggestions and no one has followed up on it, or we've had the discussion that, oh, we're not doing that this year. So after a point, do you want to know the truth, Dave? What I think this is unsustainable. I think it's unsustainable across the board, all of these budgets, because you're making a situation not only where senior citizens can no longer afford their homes. It gets very difficult for young people to buy into these communities. It's very difficult for middle class people to buy into these communities. And that's a bigger discussion than just our budget. I think the whole thing, I can tell you as a parent of a working woman that living in Georgia, that tells me I would have to make 3 times more, twice at least more than what I'm making up there to live as I live down here in Georgia. So yes, it's unsustainable. And yes, I think we could lower the budget. We could, but that's not what this board wants to do, nor has it wanted to do that. So we're at this situation where I'm not going to argue over the $10,000 that we're spending on whatever. It doesn't make sense. The process doesn't lend itself to that. It doesn't lend itself to, people don't listen. So yes, do I think this is unsustainable? Yes. Do I think going up to the max after winning by 17 votes is problematic? I do. I do think it's problematic. And I think that it makes us look tone deaf. Whether that's true or not, that's the way it appears to the community. So yes, if I would think that if we are concerned about this budget passing, we would go back and sharpen our pencils and look where we at least for the community, parts of the community who are saying we're dying under here. We've just been reassessed. We've had a shift in the base proportions due to LIPA. Our taxes have increased. Our water has quadrupled for those of us who are American water customers. Yes, I think if you're concerned about this budget passing, we should sharpen our pencils. We should go back, and we should not go up to the maximum allowable limit. That's what I think.
So, first of all, the very outset, you said, if you want me to be honest, yes, we would always love for everyone up here to be honest, and I appreciate your candor and being honest. I would also say that there's been a pencil sharpener in each of our hands for the last 3 sessions we've gone through this. It is within, Marianne, please, I let everyone speak, and I'd like to be able to finish my point. That opportunity has been there. It continues to be there as trustees to go through. In the past, when you have advocated for those things, most recently, I believe last meeting, you advocated for the elimination of Latin and different languages.
I didn't advocate for it. I asked to look at it to see if there would be cost savings if we went from 5 languages to 3 languages. I asked for that to be looked at. I didn't advocate for the elimination of it. And I have repeatedly said in this boardroom, both this year and every year that I have sat on this board, that our administration keeps going up and up and up on the number of administrators we have. And that certainly we could do better on administration. I have always advocated for that, Dave. But to think that you're going to go through a budget line by line, and I'm going to sit here and say, well, Olivia, could you save $10,000 on pencils is absurd.
I would say that there's a difference between talking about realistic numbers and changes and proposals that one would propose and making statements like our administration keeps going up and more and more and more. Number one is a percentage of our overall budget that's numerically not accurate. Number two, the one administrator that we've added this year is a new assistant director of special ed for elementary. If you didn't support that, then you should continue.
I advocated for that. Don't put in my mouth that I didn't
Marianne,
support
I didn't
that.
finish my sentence. If you didn't approve of that, then you shouldn't have voted for that position.
I did approve of that. The point is, Dave, when we started on this board, we added additional administrators, 4 additional administrators. We always had an assistant superintendent for special ed. We were unable to fill that spot, and then it was eliminated in the next budget. It apparently has had a detrimental effect on our students. So I advocated for an assistant director of special ed at the elementary level to be there. That doesn't mean that I don't think other administrators could be eliminated. I'm not having that discussion publicly when you're talking about particular people.
Just for the clarification, I wasn't you've been on the board longer than I have. I wasn't on the board when you added those 4 administrators. You're a term ahead of me. But I'm aware of those positions. I think for me, I think we probably want to move a little back further into this conversation with the actual budget lines. I think the difference between making those general statements, like, oh, it's unsustainable, or, oh, we have to make changes, and what those actual cuts would be, is the difference between them being conversations that sound good on the mic and conversations that work good with a calculator.
Let me tell you something, Dave. I don't make conversations that sound good on the mic. That's your specialty. So don't even put that out there. I'm not listening to that nonsense and you trying to gaslight me. It's ridiculous. And I'm not going to second guess Olivia's numbers about whether these numbers are right or wrong.
So what are the role of the budget evaluation process?
When we have conversations about the administrative structure and different administrators and how that's going to be done, and no one is responsive to it. I've said year after year about looking at foreign languages because that is a long-term thing. You cannot just overnight eliminate a foreign language. I've had these discussions before, and no one really wants to listen, and no one wants to make any changes on that. So please do not try and paint me as not being. It's a ridiculous statement for me to say that the copier lease should be less, and that's where we should save money, or we should eliminate a teacher when I don't know what the enrollment is or the complexion of the class. What I'm saying to you is you asked me whether I thought it was sustainable. I'm telling you, I don't think this is a sustainable model. You're going to drive people out of the district, but you have to do it we've talked about this, and what you've said to me when I've talked about what we would need to do in the future in the face of LIPA is I'm not going to have that conversation. That's a bigger community conversation. So you want to have a bigger community conversation about what we're cutting? Let's have that bigger community conversation about what we would cut if LIPA came up. But to think you're having that discussion in terms of do we have enough money for transportation, that's just ridiculous.
So I surely will remind you and every other trustee that the personal attacks are not something that we should be doing up here.
Well, you started that game right there, Dave, when you said that I was making generalized statement. You asked me a question, I answered it, and you were inferring that I was not doing my job or not telling the truth. So yeah,
That's different. That's different than directly accusing me of gaslighting you, which you just did. We don't want to set that tone. We have had conversations with this board about the leadership of this district and what it means and the responsibility of being up here setting a tone for the people of this district and the collegiality that we expect in every employee and frankly every student within this organization. And to sit up here and to say that because you haven't been listened to, I'm gaslighting you or I'm putting words in your mouth is not accurate and not fair. As you know very well, because you are a very experienced trustee here, we have exactly zero power as individuals. We only have power when acting as a board. And so when we come up here, we make suggestions or we make recommendations. That doesn't carry the weight of anything until we get the majority of the people on the board to get behind it. So if you have interest in cutting certain areas or making certain suggestions, those are things that you can propose. I'm not going to say any specific one that you have proposed because I'm not interested in getting scolded again, but I will tell you that you've certainly made many recommendations. I think you would agree with that, and you haven't been able to get a critical mass on them because that wasn't the direction that this board as a whole felt was representative of what the community wants. If you feel differently, that's great. We should all be up here expressing our different opinions. You and I certainly have been working at this together long enough to know that we have very different opinions about a lot of things. Probably have more in common than we differ upon, but we certainly have a different approach to many different things that are up here, and I think that is very healthy. There is not anyone on this board that I agree with 100% of the time on everything. I mean, look at us right now. We're half masked, we're half unmasked. We have all different kinds of ways of approaching things. That's healthy. That's good for the community. But because someone has an idea and we don't necessarily implement that idea right away, doesn't mean that person doesn't have a say. It means that's the way this is supposed to work.
That is exactly my point. Because why would I waste my breath again saying things that no one seems to want to adopt? And if the budget is at 17 votes passing, one would think that would send some sort of interest in looking at other ways to save. And as far as the collegiality is concerned, David, I don't want to get into it now, but you are setting the tone. You set the tone of those conversations, and I'm going to tell you, it is not just my perception.
I have no doubt about that. But in terms of calling me out for the way I'm running these meetings, that is inappropriate. It's against our bylaws and our procedures and our protocols, and we don't do it. We just don't do it. It's not the way we do this. We say what we have to say. We make our case, and we present it to the community. Clearly,
if that rule were followed, I would be a very happy person. But it's not. So move on. So move on to the budget because we're just not going to resolve this. So do the line by line, Dave. The page by page, because we're not going to resolve this.
I think we have resolved this.
No, we have not. But
we
just
agreed.
Move on.
Well, there is a videotape of every meeting, and the tone that's set, and the way people speak, and certainly anyone is free to watch those.
They are, and they are watching. Believe me.
Absolutely.
They are.
Absolutely, and that's important. I say it right now to everyone here and everyone on the videotape. The more you engage in this process, the better. The more you know what's going on here, the better. The more you see what's going on with our schools, the better. That's why we videotape them. That's why we live stream them. That's why we come and meet. That's why we follow open meeting laws. That's why we have public comment. Public comment's not required. We offer public comment because it's important that people contribute to this process. The days when we sat here and there were 3 or 4 people here, I'd rather have people come en masse. I don't know if everyone's here en masse, not en masse, en masse, ENMASSE, to participate in our meetings. And the comment, I don't know what everyone's here for. I don't know if everyone's here to. I don't know why everyone's here. Hopefully, it's here all to hear about the budget, because that's what we're doing today. That's the bulk of what we're doing today. But whatever you're here for, if you're here to complain, if you're here because you're happy, if you're here because you heard this was interesting, I'm much happier with the crowd here than not with the crowd. Anyone else have any thoughts on this? So, Dr. Dolan, the first line is staffing. Is that a general line, or are we going to move on to page 12 to discuss?
Oh, we are beginning on page 12.
Okay. Page 12 represents the district's commercial and general liabilities, as well as BOCES administrative and capital costs that are expected to increase by 4 to 5% next year. This district is a member of the New York Schools Insurance Reciprocal and experiences some protection from the high costs in the commercial insurance market, but this year the business office was informed by NYSER to expect higher increases next year due to storm-related and cyber claims nationwide. The BOCES costs are determined by Nassau BOCES, and the increases are mainly due to the rising cost of health insurance, which are passed on to all component districts. Any questions or comments on page 12?
Yes, please.
Please, Trustee Mosca.
Just my usual clarification on the split properties, the refund of school taxes. So this is what we pay to other districts to refund the taxes we've collected from residents whose properties span our district and another district, correct?
That's accurate. Yes.
Okay. And in return,
And is offset by a line on the revenue page
thank you.
of monies that we received from, I believe, 3 districts: Locust Valley, Glen Cove, and Jericho. Roslyn, thank you, that we received from them in return for
Right.
those residents who have split properties but choose to send their kids here.
Thank you. Took the words out of my mouth, Tom. Thank you.
So many amazing.
And I'm sorry, just point it right.
You couldn't hear me? Okay. So there were so many great services here that were listed to help all of our students. I was particularly excited to see the addition of the assisted technology and the training for the twice exceptional students. So I was hoping maybe you could talk a little bit more about that, Chris, and how you sort of envision that.
Excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt you, Andrea, but I'm told the audio is down on the live streaming.
Sorry,
Elliot's looking to check right now. Is there a way for us to confirm or that, Elliot? I'm guessing that we've received word from somebody out in the outside world.
Just got a text back. It's better now. It's back.
There we go.
Okay.
Okay. Elliot, whatever you did was perfect. I think the way you looked at it may have fixed it.
Thank you.
So the question was about the addition of the assisted tech, because there are a lot of actually, I see the lines for the assisted technology, which I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more to, and the training for twice exceptional students, and the universal design for learning, and then I had some other questions after that.
Sure. One decision that we made this year, the elementary principals, Deborah Small and I, was to move away from the Teachers College Readers Writers Workshop program, the formal involvement in that program, because, after 10 years, we feel very confident in our literacy program, and we're, moving towards specialized training. There's a lot written on the science of reading that we're exploring as a county group of district curriculum officials. And that has allowed us to both cut down on costs, but also offer other smaller trainings and professional development. In terms of the Twice Exceptional Gifted Inclusivity Training, there's a goal that we have that we've taken from our meetings and the board meetings and from discussions with teachers and parents to expanding the inclusivity of our enrichment programs for helping to diagnose strengths in students that we might not be capturing right now. Not just into programs like science research, although we do want to expand that, but our elementary enrichment programs, accelerated programs in the middle school as well. So we want to really work with someone who can help us to get there. In terms of the assistive tech, I think we've learned a lot of lessons from individual students that we've helped through BOCES assistive tech, and the major lesson is that we can help a lot of students, not just students classified with a disability. And that's a lesson we learned from the pandemic as well, because of the needed reliance upon instructional technology. In working with our instructional technology coach, Christy Lieberman, and Chris Marino, Joe Kissinger, now Amy McKee, we do think there's a way to bring that to benefit the general population as well.
Thank you very much. And I think it also allows the district to sort of deal with two buckets, the bucket of remediation and then also the bucket of sort of accommodation. So I'm really happy to see that. And then moving to, so we have all that great assisted technology. And then we have all these like sort of edutainment software, right? Like IXL. So I was surprised about the cost of IXL, and I'm just curious, is it something that we really need? Has it been, we're back to in-person school. Do we really feel like this is a benefit?
IXL in particular is a benefit. I would say almost every elementary classroom teacher uses it. It's one of the few that we have seen shows remarkable growth potential in efficient ways. It helps teachers and students to specialize in specific target areas and reach true mastery in some of the more basic skills. So it helps in our intervention and our remediation. And I would say that's not just a North Shore thing, but that's across the county. It's definitely one of the most well-regarded, well-used, impactful programs.
Okay, because I do sometimes worry that the use of this sort of online program replaces real like face-to-face learning and overly relies on like a computer program to sort of assess where a student's at versus the one-on-one personal interaction that a student has with a teacher.
I would say, no, it's a great question. I think the assessment part definitely happens with the teacher, working in small groups, working in conjunction, and this is more of a way of targeting specific areas of need in conjunction with other ways of doing that.
All right, thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Dr. McCary. Other questions from the trustees on this section, 13 through 17? Trustee Vice President Jones?
I
think you can go next,
Okay.
and we'll work around the horn.
Thank you. So I was interested, I think, in this same section of the budget as Andrea was, the 2010 $499. Well, we've got a lot of professional learning, which is an important piece of the budget for us, and we've talked about many times because we have hundreds and hundreds of professionals, and this piece of the budget is how we support an organization that's dependent on people for what we do. It's also a line that's had some very significant swings over the years because we've needed more or less of different things. And I wanted to know if you could talk to us about why we're on sort of the low side of these numbers for this budget. Because this budget, we're talking about a total of 25,000, whereas in the past few years it's been as high as 248,000. I think that was a little pandemic driven in that year, but even in 18-19, 137,000.
I do think the Teachers College Readers Writers Workshop program is a big piece of that puzzle. I do think also having some of the programming that was in the budget even last year is now we're going through BOCES because of the state aid that we receive, and also because of the Ed Law 2D protection that we get through procuring those programs through BOCES. So there are reasons to move it out of that code. The other thing I'll say is that there is also professional development funding through the individual building codes for individual conferences. So this really does represent the consultant-based professional learning that comes to us. And then that's my last point. You know, we did a lot of upfront investment in consultant work for world language, for science, for math, and we've made those investments. We no longer need to make them at the same level because we've laid the foundation, laid the groundwork.
Thank you. And I do want to point out, it expands it's a wide range of kinds of professional development, some very academic things, some things that are about reading, but also some things that are about mental health, and things that address very specific student populations.
Since we're on administrators, so we used to have one director K through 12 of STEM and one director K through 12 of humanities. When the APPR came in, we added teacher leaders for the reason to assist in the APPR requirements. We've since changed those teacher leaders to administrators, and we restructured it. And at the 6 through 12 level, you have a math and a science rather than one STEM administrator. So I'm wondering if we've considered combining those positions anywhere, or are there any other places in terms of you have two assistant principals at the high school that we had more students back in those days. We have less students now. Are there places that you see where we could achieve some efficiencies in the administrative structure?
I recollect sharing some data with the board in January at our retreat that spoke to that, and some models were examined and evaluated. And I think at that time, early in the budget season, January, before we even put pen to paper, my sense was that that was not something to pursue at this time. Certainly an analysis, a financial analysis could be completed.
I just felt compelled to raise it, but I do think we could achieve some efficiencies in that structure.
Thank you. Other trustees? Pages 13 through 17?
I just have a quick,
Yeah, sure, Rich.
quick question. In terms of BOCES services, the EdVista test scoring, is that something that we're required to do?
It's not. We had chosen to do that. Actually, my predecessor started doing that to offset the cost of substitutes, believe it or not, that comes with doing the test scoring internally. That obviously we didn't need that, during the pandemic year. Last year, the tests were modified, so we didn't need that to the same extent. This year, we're going back to, and next year, back to normal testing. unless the state makes any changes, full Regents exams. So we do it at the elementary and middle school level with the state assessments to offset the time and the cost of substitutes, which actually does add up. So it's not a requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Choice.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. Maria, please.
Yeah, thank you. Just looking at the, back to the administrative positions, I just wanted to look at the special education. So when we see the actual expenditure dropping from 2019-20 to 2020-21, that was the elimination of one of the positions, and then the increase that we're seeing this year is reflective of the fact that we've reinstated that position.
That's correct.
Okay.
And if I could just clarify also, when that recommendation was made, I don't know off the top of my head where the lines were, but there were corresponding increases in other areas to try to make up for the role. Correct? It wasn't just drop it and do nothing, but it was reflected elsewhere. That plan did not ultimately achieve the results that we wanted, I think it's fair to say. But it was still, it wasn't just dropped and
Right. Understood.
let the kids fend for themselves. But it was determined, or at least recommended, that this model was the way to go. And for the record, the budget transfer that we made earlier tonight, that we as a board all approved, was to cover the salary of that position, because that person has already been hired and that person is already working for us.
Right.
And of course, the money wasn't in the budget, so it had to be moved from somewhere else in the budget to cover it. But they're on the job.
Understood. Yeah. Thank you.
13 through 17. Okay, we'll move on to employee benefits, pages 49 and 50. This was a huge driver of the increase this year. The total dollar value for this increase is $1.927, I'm going to round, $1 million increase, just to keep these folks going. Employee benefits account for more than 25% of our overall budget. This, of course, is a people business, and that's why. It includes pension costs for teachers, administrators, teacher assistants in the TRS system, pension costs for all support staff in the employee retirement system, the ERS, and the district's Social Security, Medicare taxes, workers' comp, unemployment, health, life, and dental insurances. The district's contribution rate, which is set annually by the Teachers Retirement System Board, is estimated to increase between 10 to 10.5% of the 2022-23 member payroll. The estimated average employer contribution rate for ERS, which is set by the state controller, has been lowered from last year to this coming year. The budget below shows an overall increase of $539 and a decrease of $423 in TRS and ERS respectively. The employer cost for Social Security and Medicare is projected to increase by $368,000 due to projected contractual salary increases and the projected Social Security wage cap in 2023. Health insurance costs are expected to increase by approximately $1.4 million next year. This is a result of the Nice Ship Empire Plan rate increases in 2022, as well as projected increases in 2023. The district's cost for providing health insurance benefits for its active employees increased by more than 10% in 2022. So pages 49 and 50. That's a pretty good summary. I threw out some numbers, but Dr. Dolan?
And if I could, a number of you were not there the night that we introduced the budget for the very first time, and I did speak at some length about this line. I think we're all seeing increases in the cost of health insurance. I kiddingly said that night that there's no such thing as a free pandemic. We've heard a lot about free masks and free testing kits and free vaccinations, and they're not free. Those costs have been passed along. I don't want anybody to think that we're extending benefits beyond what we've done before. In the case of the retirement systems and in the case of the health insurance system, these are bills that we get in the mail. This is not something that we go out and we say, can we extend our benefits? Can we get better benefits? No, these are the same benefits. And in fact, as a member, I can tell you that the benefits, in fact, are not as good as they have been in past years, because on the other side of the insurance company charging us more money, they are also charging members more money in things like co-pays for prescriptions and visits. So the insurance companies are certainly, they perceive that they're caught in the middle. I don't know if I'd agree with that. And I think we're much more caught in the middle as a district and as individuals. But I want to make it clear that the phrase employee benefits, implies that we are extending something that we've not extended before. These are, again, bills that we receive that are non-negotiable. However, they are topics that do come up in negotiations, and I do want to make that clear to the board. Everybody knows that, I think. It is certainly something that we can talk about in terms of contribution rates. But our bill went up, their bill went up, and I'm sure many of you are experiencing the same thing. The retirement system's a little bit different in that that's a bill that we get, and one run by the state, one run by the controller, and they are both retirement systems that we're obligated to participate in. Employees participate in those and contribute to those as well. And a recent change in legislation makes certain that new employees, at least for the last 4 or 5 years, will contribute to those systems for their entire life. They will be contributory to their own pension for the entire time that they work, which I happen to think is very appropriate.
Thank you, Tom. That's helpful. And you're right. I own a business, has locations in 2 states, so I'm operating under 2 different plans. And yeah, the rates are, no, there's no free pandemic and the rates are going up, and there's, you can shop, but as we all know, there's only so far that can go. Are there any questions on 49 and 50?
Just a small thing.
Yes.
Kind of Tom's comments made me look back. I had actually looked at this section a number of weeks ago. I prepared incorrectly one of our
Call it being ahead of the game.
yeah, right. I'd like to do that. So first of all, just a clarification. The Social Security program that's listed here includes Medicare, correct? That's Social Security and Medicare, those sections.
Yeah.
And I just happened, I don't know why I picked that one.
But if I could, while you mentioned Social Security,
Mhm.
another increase here is that the Social Security gap that Dave mentioned, that Olivia included in the narrative, there is a change in the law in terms of the way that we are billed now for Social Security. So that increase was not just an increase in Social Security, but also for, as I remember, and I'm looking at Olivia as I say it, for our retirees, that Medicare piece, it is now billed to us differently than it was previously. And trust me, as a person who's on the other end also of Medicare, it didn't go down for recipients there, but it did go up for districts.
Right. That's probably more interesting than what I was going to point out. But just that I happen to look back, since we have access to the many prior years of information. I looked back 10 years on the Social Security line, and it has actually in 10 years it's gone up almost $2 million. It's pretty sobering. It does explain a lot. These costs do only increase.
And it's also because the limit increases every year.
Right. Yeah.
Payroll goes up, limit goes up. We have to capture all that in the expense budget.
And we also, apropos of what Tom was saying, we refund Medicare premiums, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
To our
so,
retirees.
right.
Over 65.
That is to retirees.
So
just
wonderful.
so
To
everybody else
retirees. I'm
understands,
sorry.
right?
To retirees.
When a
yeah.
person retires from the district, I'm not sure what the
Right.
numbers are here, but because their health insurance cost goes down, they are entitled to a rebate on a portion of it from the district. It's an arduous task that the business office has to take place with every retiree.
Other questions on 49 and 50, employee benefits?
I have a small one.
Sure.
So, the state budget format has us break out all of these codes on the benefits between the part attributable to program, to admin, and to capital. Workers' comp only has program and capital and not the admin component.
Yeah, because typically you don't get a lot of the claims from that group.
Mm-hmm.
The claims come from the capital group and the program group. So it didn't make sense to include that cost in our budget. Because these lines refer to specific group of employees, programs and teachers, bus drivers, and the capital component is our custodial group. They climb the ladder, they fall, and that's where the workers' compensation claims do come from.
Thank you.
We're ready to move on to page 51, which is debt service. The district borrows money from financial institutions to build, renovate, or purchase large fixed equipment and pays it back over time. Debt service in this part of the budget covers the principal and interest on serial bonds, interest cost on bond anticipation notices, known as BANs, and tax anticipation notes, TANs. TANs are short-term notes that are used to meet the district's cash flow needs before taxes are collected from the county. This budget includes debt service for permanent financing of Phase 1 of the 2019 voter-approved bond projects and interest on BANs for Phase 2 of the same bond, which are scheduled to begin in the summer of 2022. In addition, the budget includes $350 to upgrade the infrastructure of the bus depot and install charging stations to convert 6 large school buses from diesel to electric. And that, of course, is a proposal in this right now, and we're going to be hearing more about that in coming sessions. Questions on debt service, page 51. Okay. Tom, are we set for budget review tonight?
We are. We've reviewed every page of the budget, and those of you who have been here for all of them, you've seen us go through the D pages, page by page. So every line, literally every line of the budget has been subject to a conversation by the board, and if there's questions later, we'll be happy to answer them.
I just want to add to that. I want to, two things. I want to say, first of all, that I appreciate how the whole budget discussion actually started last fall with a discussion among the trustees of what the budget priorities were going to be for the year. And I think that's an important starting point. Like, that is a point at which trustees put in a lot of time and thought into how we're going to prioritize the spending of the funds that we have. And out of that, and out of all the time and conversations then the administrators and the staff put into this, we get this budget, which I do think in a lot of ways reflects the values of the district. So tremendous thank you for all the work that the administration and the staff has put into it, but also to acknowledge too that I think everyone can see the number of hours that trustees put into these meetings, that to actually go through and read every word and every line of these books is a tremendous time commitment. So thank you to those of you who have put that in to making this budget what it is. Thank you.
Procedurally, it's also important to just, Tom, why don't you explain how the budget works? It's your budget, and then, yeah.
Yeah, I know. I always feel self-conscious when I call it the superintendent's budget. All that means is that at this point, it is a recommendation to the board. The administration starts just after those priorities are set, and I do remember that conversation back in the fall. Olivia and I meet with every single administrator. Again, I will commend Olivia for not being Dr. No, as many business officials are. Olivia is so incredibly invested in the life of our students and can sit there and talk about teachers' classrooms in a way that I've heard very few other business officials be able to talk about. And those conversations that start with principals and directors, and they come to us with great ideas, and didn't know I was going to bring it up, but lots of ideas. Here's 3 pages of ideas that didn't make it. And the font is very small, trust me, but there's lots of good ideas that have been brought to us that we could not accommodate, especially this year because of some extenuating circumstances. So we go through those, then we start to look at the numbers, and as the year goes on, there are certain predictable things. We get the TRS rate, we get the ERS rate, we get the bill from NYSHIP, and all that adds to the conversation, and slowly but surely a budget's developed that we present to you. And it's only a month ago, by the way, and I happen to know it was a month ago because it's Julia's 1-month birthday. I wasn't going to mention that tonight. But a month ago, we presented the budget to you for the very first time. So this is a telescoped experience, if you will. I mean, we really get a lot of work in. What the public can expect from here is there is a strong possibility of a work meeting of the board being scheduled between now and the next public meeting. A work meeting is one where the board would assemble and would work. There'd be no public audience to visitors. However, the public, because of the open meetings law, would be welcome to observe what was going on. That will, of course, be noticed. You'll know about that meeting, and there'll be some good conversation there. Then on the 24th, it stops being the superintendent's budget. I present what we've compiled up until that point to the board, and the board adopts either that budget or a budget that they choose to modify. And then it becomes the community's budget. And that is the moment where we turn to the community and present it to you and explain to you what we've done, what priorities we've tried to set, and ask for your approval of it. And again, sorry for those of you that have been at the other meetings. You know, it is just a unique process. I mean, I just marvel at, and I wonder what would happen if other municipal bodies had to hold their budget up to a public vote. You know, certainly on a county or state level, it might be one thing, but I'd love to see the Department of Defense, you know, have to get a vote on its budget with all of us voting on it. But we do that, and it's why school boards and why local school and locally supervised schools are so unique and such an important part of what makes up America, to be honest, because it is a phenomenon across the country. Sorry, that was probably way more than Dave thought. I was
No, it's actually really helpful, and I think it's also worth adding as an addendum to that. One of the benefits of having someone, and I say this not to make you blush, but someone of your stature here as our intern for this year, is that it is an opportunity for us to see this process through your eyes and having you bring your experience to this. And I've certainly learned more from that. I hope my fellow trustees have as well, because you've been a real asset in putting this together. And this is challenging. You talk about the 2% tax cap law and the limitations we have under that, and benefits that are mandatorily increased by $1.9 million. Not a lot of flexibility in there. And you and Olivia and the business office and the creative approaches you have with your entire administrative team have gotten us to this point, whereas the board marches slowly towards that time when it will become our budget, we still have a lot of work to do. To clarify, that work session will have no public comment, but it certainly we'll have live in-person spectators if somebody does want to come and see what we're doing. But it's going to be budget focused, one agenda item. Okay, so for trustees, with that, we will move on to our next regular business item, 10B, which is our policy review. I am not on the policy committee. I don't know if someone from the policy committee is going to lead us in this.
Yes,
All right.
I can introduce this. Do we want to hear? Shall I go through them one by one, or can I give you a brief overview and then we can take a look? We have here 7.
Yeah, I mean, we all have them, and we all went through them, and they're also, for the record, they're all available on the public site, our board docs. You can click on them in the hyperlink, which is in a change we've made. All the district policies, the 10 different series of policies, are all posted on the district website for anyone to peruse. But the ones we're going through tonight, we all have them. So I think if you want to have a very brief description and then ask for anyone who has any questions or comments.
Right. So I'll just say that so there are 7. I believe there are 7 policies and 2 regulations, and these are obviously the tracked changes versions. So you can see what changes we made in many cases. For example, the first 2, policy 1000 and policy 1100, we really were just cleaning up the language. There was a surprising number of errors, places where grammar doesn't agree, tenses don't agree, spelling, plurals. So just a lot of cleanup. Those are 2 good examples of that, but it happens throughout. In the case of 1120 and 1120-R, the regulation that goes with it, we basically decided it was appropriate to adopt language that is suggested by the NISBA sample policies. So NISBA is the New York State School Boards Association that we are members of, and one of the services they provide is they keep track of policies. They propose samples for boards that are either creating a new policy or perhaps in our case reviewing. So in both those cases, having to do with records retention and availability, we thought that the language proposed by their sample policy was appropriate and wanted to include it. Everything else is pretty self-explanatory. Media relations, we kind of updated it for modern media a little bit more. And I think the rest are going to be quite obvious, but if anybody has any specific questions, we can go through those as well.
I had some minor questions and some typos that I found. so I just wanted to point
I
them
have
out.
no doubt we missed plenty of typos.
The first I have is on policy 1120, so I don't know if anyone has on any of the policies before that, or should I just?
I think if you're ready,
Okay.
if you're teed up, Lisa.
Okay. So my first question is there a reason we don't paginate the policies? Just because I think page number might be helpful if people printed them out and wanted to see a page number. It's just a question.
I think it just changes
Like
all the
yeah,
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I threw that out there. All right. In the second paragraph, second line, with the, there needs to be a space between with the, and then third line, obtain access, there needs to be a space. Third paragraph.
Just hang on, let me just make
Yeah.
sure we're doing this. Do you have them there, Betty? Are you? Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
I really appreciate it. I didn't want your words to. have
Okay.
be
I don't want to
Thank
presume,
you,
but as
Betty.
fast as we're going, Betty's pretty fast.
Ready.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Third paragraph, second line, the official, there needs to be a space. Under retention and destruction of records, 1, 2, 3, fourth line, the district. Then the line after that, the minimum. And the line after that, those records.
I'm going to swear that that was not in there when we first reviewed. Right. Things get.
So
It
that
does
was-
change.
that
That
was
does
really
change
it.
it.
It messed, right. Oh, okay. Okay, well, that was really it for the spacing. Okay. Okay. So on the next page, the top of the page, it says 4030 for 430. Oh, where's that, Lisa?
Yeah, where are you?
Am I on this wrong? Oh, I'm sorry. This is 1120R. I moved to the next policy. Sorry. The regulation. So on page 2,
Mhm.
tell me when you're ready. Page 2 of 1120R. Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was 4:30, 4 o'clock. Okay. And then on number 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The ninth line, it says individual may be limited in the discretion of the records access officer, but I think it should be at the discretion. Right. And number 3, third line, between access and officer, there's like a weird thing. Okay.
What the introductory apostrophe in the other direction? I don't know
Right,
what that's called.
exactly.
Lisa, I'm nominating you 6 months ahead of time to be on the policy committee next year.
I mean, I have to say there were no really
No, this is
changes
great.
of substance, so I didn't find any of those. Number 4, the second line, 5 business day. It should be days. Number 7. Oh no, sorry. Number 7 was just a note to myself because I had a question about the next one. All right, wait. All right, next page, page 3, number 9. The last line, it says, and the infrastructure, for example, period records, there really should be a space between the period and records. And 1120E. So this is more of a substance question for the policy committee, I think. So under notice, it says you have a right to appeal. And I just think, shouldn't we say you have to appeal within 30 days? Because it doesn't say that there, but it does say in the policy that they have to appeal within 30 days.
You're on 1120E.
1120E.
Right.
So when you read through the regulation 1120R,
Yeah.
it said that they have to appeal the denial within 30 days. Right? Did I read that right?
I think
Okay.
that's right. It certainly does seem.
So I just feel like if you're telling people that that you have a right to appeal, but you really have a right to appeal within 30 days.
I think that should be obviously run by the lawyers, but if it's correct, I think it should be in
Okay.
there for sure.
Sure.
That's a good catch.
And now I'm on 1222. I'm skipping to the last policy. and these are minor. Number 7, any Board of Education. I think any should be lowercase just because everything else is lowercase. And then in the last paragraph on that first page, it says if a booster organization wishes to make a contribution of money, comma, service time, it should be service, comma, time, right? Because we're, or, yeah? Okay. That's all I had. Thank you.
You don't want to imply that participation in one of our boosters is service time,
Service
right?
time,
No, it's,
yeah.
it's both service, although it does take some time. Yeah. Thank you, Lisa.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah. Other trustee comments on the on policies?
I think everyone would be relieved to know I got to make those in the policy.
Okay.
So I've already made mine.
I just want to say good job. Good job to the policy committee because I thought you did a great job on, actually updating and revising the policy.
Absolutely. If no one has any, I had a couple questions, but I want to go give everyone else an opportunity.
No,
Are you good?
I don't have any questions.
Okay. On 1120, I was just curious if this litigation hold insert was given to us directly by NISPA. We're still using the NISPA service, and they put it in there.
Yes, we use their language.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Great. On 1120E, I wasn't sure if it was appropriate or not, but it lists the application for public access to records as a physical address. Should the email address be included there? Because that is a way we have a set. I don't know exactly what it is. It's records officer appeal, records appeal officer, something like that. But there was no reason not. I think the email should be there to make it easier for folks to file information requests.
And the most requests we get are electronic. So yes, I think it should be there.
Okay, good.
We can add that.
Thank you. And then 1130, in paragraph 5, the first one with the redlining, I was wondering if we could drop the word operations. The content of this online presence shall be limited to providing accurate information about the district operations.
Yeah.
How about just the
I
district?
like it much better. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no reason to limit it to operations, I wouldn't think. And further, where it says all postings to social media sites will be treated, I thought it should just simply say all online postings will be treated. Social media limits it. There are other places to be online electronically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, social media is certainly the largest place that people are, but there are, I mean, we got rid of all blog references because that's, I assume, sounded very dated, but I think people still do that, and there's online articles and
So
podcasts and all those kinds of things.
I'm sorry, Dave. So you're
Yeah, sure.
suggesting, so it would read all online postings will be treated with the same care, blah, blah, blah.
All online postings will be treated with the same care and consideration as any other communication.
Betty, there's also, in that same paragraph, there's a apostrophe after policy right before the period. And then we did also talk about, instead of the redundancy of his and her, since there is now appropriate grammatically to replace that.
I thought about that, and that is that would be a giant task to go through these thousands of
Well,
policies.
The policy committee
did
is
talk
keeping a
about that.
list
Okay.
Yeah.
of those
We
things.
identified
Yeah.
several items that
Yeah.
we wanted to try to correct in all policies, and that was one of them.
Yeah, I don't know how we missed
So we
that.
are trying to
Yeah.
keep an eye out for that. We're on it. We're on
Great.
several themes as we go through these policies.
Great. So this is if there are no more questions about the policy or comments, just want to be clear so I understand. This is a discussion.
Right. The district's bylaws, the board's bylaws indicate that changes in policy take place by having a first policy reading. That's what this was tonight. The board has read all the policies. They've been presented publicly. They will be brought back next month, and if approved, would become the new policy.
Okay.
The next meeting, March 24th.
Yes.
The next public meeting.
Next
Yes.
public. Okay. I thank the trustees for that. We will move on to action item 11, which is personnel, letters A through G. Are there any questions? Sorry, is there a motion to open discussion?
Motion.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? All in favor of these personnel items?
Aye.
We now move on to item 12, which is comments from the public. We invite anyone who would like to speak to come to the podium. Just say your name, town of residence. I did want to, on the website, it does say a couple things about this. I just want to go through and say the board can't permit in public session discussion involving any specific individual district personnel or students. So if there is a comment about a particular situation, please find a way to address it without calling out the individual person, theoretically. Thank you. I'm sorry, did you push
Mic's
on the
on right
button?
now?
Yeah, I think you're good.
Okay. I apologize. I'm not here for the budget. My name's Jordan Kirker. I live in the community with my wife, Amy, and 4 children. I'm an orthopedic surgeon and hold a medical license in New York and the state of Florida. I stood up here almost a year ago to speak out about the devastation masks were causing upon our children. 15 days to slow the spread had turned into 420 days at the time. It is an unbelievable 666 days now that our children have sacrificed their social, mental, and physical well-being. It may take decades to realize the psychological damage that these masks and protocols have had on our children. History will be the judge, and unfortunately, I believe you are all on the wrong side. We are thrilled that our children are no longer required to be in school shackled with a mask on their face. We are not celebrating, but relieved that our children can finally be free after almost 2 years of having their childhoods disrupted. However, this fight isn't over so long as we have a government, a governor, and a school board still speaking of flexibility when it comes to COVID protocols and future masking. Winston Churchill famously said, "Those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it." Have any of you learned anything from the pandemic response in this country? If not, here's what we've learned. Nothing this government has imposed or implemented altered the natural course of this virus. Johns Hopkins released a study showing that lockdowns had little to no reduction in COVID mortality. Schools remain one of the safest places with extremely low transmission rates. Vaccines, while may reduce severe disease, do not prevent transmission of COVID. Furthermore, a recent New York State study demonstrated only 12% efficacy in transmission in ages 5 to 11. Anxiety, mental health, depression, suicide, childhood obesity, developmental and learning delays have sharply increased during the last 2 years. Our children have been left behind. 865 COVID-related deaths in 11 million documented cases ages 0 to 18. That's a mortality rate of 0.00007, 4 zeros. Statistically zero. 72,039 children have died from all other causes in the last 2 years. All terribly tragic, but we do not uproot our children's lives for this. And finally, cloth and surgical masks offer no benefit and do nothing to prevent the spread of COVID. As a CNN medical analyst, Lena Wen, stated, cloth masks are nothing more than facial decorations. I would imagine that 95% of our children were using these type of masks that offered zero protection. Here's a little education on masks. This is a cloth mask, nothing more than a t-shirt slapped to your face, offers zero protection from COVID. This is a surgical mask. This is a mask that I use every day in the operating room. It's not designed to prevent respiratory infections. It's designed to prevent blood from getting on my face during surgery or from saliva from my mouth or a sneeze getting onto my patient's open wound. This is a KN95 mask, a little bit better than these, but still offers very little protection from COVID-19. Now this is the N95 mask, the only mask that offers any type of serious protection from COVID. Have any of you been fitted for this mask? Because that's the only way it truly works, when you wear it 100% of the time and it's fitted properly. I'm going to demonstrate because this is an impractical thing in our society. The mask gets put on, and this is how we get fitted in the hospital. A beehive suit gets put on our head like this, and a nurse sprays perfume in that suit. You wave your head 20 times back and forth about twice, and you have to determine whether you can sense any of the smells. It's not practical, it's not meant for children, and it's not practical in this society. Your job as educators is to create free-thinking, inquisitive, and independent young adults that are ready and able to take on a world that can be overwhelming and scary at times. Instead, you projected your own fears upon them and created a generation scared of their own shadow and some scared of their own friends. I truly feel sad that this is how you're living your life, prisoner to your own fear. I, for one, have not chosen to raise my children to live this way. The entire world has moved on from COVID. It's time you put our children first. There should be no more discussion of protocols, isolation, social distancing, quarantining, or testing to return to school. If a child is sick, they stay home. If they're healthy, they need to be in school. It's that simple. The only protocol you should be discussing now is to never force a child to wear a mask again. Separate them from their friends, or stay home from school if they are healthy. No more mandates. This is all despite a new variant, a new surge, or even despite a bad flu season. I know we're in a new phase in this district, and we're all thankful for that. However, this district and this board did not fight for our children when they needed it the most. You hid behind the governor and bureaucrats at the CDC and Department of Health who have gotten everything wrong since the beginning of this pandemic. But what happens when the next variant emerges or a bad flu season arrives? Are you going to revert back to old COVID protocols and distance, mask, and quarantine our children that serves no purpose but to harm our children's well-being? The Department of Health releases guidelines and recommendations, not mandates. It's up to the local school boards at this point. Will the board pass a resolution that prevents these measures from ever being implemented again upon our children? Parents know what is best for their children, not you, and certainly not the government. I'm happy to further discuss any of these concerns in any forum in the future that's appropriate. Thank you for your time.
Dr. Cooker, I really appreciate you coming tonight. And I'm glad you shared those words. Thank you. Other folks from the public who would like to share their thoughts?
Paul Pasculdin from Glen Head. I too like the fact that the masks, for the most part, are off and we can see everybody. I think that's great. Two things. One, I want to commend Marianne on her comments around the spending in the district, and hopefully there were some open ears to some of the things that she said. Actually, that's not what I wanted to talk about today. What I did want to talk about was last time I was here, I asked about the spending for the COVID relief funds that the district received. So the district received $700,000 in federal aid and $300,000 in state aid. Dr. Dolan responded, sent me a note where I could look at that information. I looked at it. Dr. Z put together a very comprehensive list of what the spending was. I did some research with members of the district. Members of the district were very happy at the additional services that a lot of the children got as a result of COVID. And so I want to thank you for putting that together. And I encourage the board to publicize something like this. You received $1 million in aid, and it was spent well. You should publicize that. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, and I think you just did. That's when they hear it from, honestly, when Chris and I brag on what we've done, it sounds self-serving, but I appreciate hearing that from you, and I'm glad that you got that email I sent you, and I know you acknowledged it that very day. Thanks, Paul.
Yes.
Hi, Rana Gerasi, Glen Head. I was actually not going to come here today. I was live streaming, Zooming, and I was home watching the dispute amongst the two of you. And I felt compelled to come here today to show support to Marianne. I just wanted to say thank you for being the voice of reason and really speaking up and speaking on the behalf of a large community in our area that feels that their voice has not been heard and has been misrepresented by the board. Dave, you as the board president as Marianne said, set the tone for these meetings, and to be speaking to someone, to a trustee, the way that you have is, I mean, I felt compelled to come here and show support. So it was very intense, very heated. I was home. I had a very long week. I'm exhausted. I had no intention of being here, but I just wanted to say thank you. And I wanted to show support. And there's so many group texts going on where we're all applauding you, and none of us could come out, but I made it my point to be here. So I just wanted to say that. Dave, you had said something along the lines that because she feels that her voice is not being heard, she's making sort of accusations towards you. That struck a chord with me because there's a large portion of our community that feels that we are not being represented appropriately by the board and our voices are not being heard. And to see the interaction and how that situation was handled, of course there's a large community that feels the way that we do. Of course. And at the end of the day, I think you guys need to be reminded you're here to represent the community as a whole and not project your own personal beliefs onto us, which is what has happened. So thank you. And then I also want to say thank you to the doctor I don't know you, but we have been mimicking and saying the same thing, but I think it just resonates differently when it comes from a clinician. So I appreciate, in fact, you talking about the beehive and the mask was very informative, and I just hope that a lot of people here who believe that they're medical professionals and are actually not really did pay attention to you, because you have a medical degree and many don't. So thank you. And that's all.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lauren Grella from Glen Cove. I want to speak on a few things. Thank you, Dr. Kirker. We've all heard my spiel on the masks. Hopefully they're gone for good. I want to ask, as we talk about the budget, is the district still spending, I think it was like $10,000 monthly on contact tracing? Or is that one of the protocols, one of the COVID measures we no longer have to do?
We are no longer obligated to contact trace, but in a letter that I sent home, I think just before the break,
Yeah.
I indicated that we are still doing some follow-up. That is
Okay.
when we find out when a student is tested positive. There is some follow-up, and we do still use that service because it is, and I'm happy to say it, because there are so few cases, we were really able to limit those services, and I don't even think it'll approach the figure that you mentioned in total.
Okay.
And I'm also hopeful, and I don't know if the vendor is listening or not, but I'm hopeful that at some point, even in the month of March, that we're going to be able to say that we're done.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Great. One other thing with regard to the IXL and some of the technology items listed in the budget, given that it passed by 17 votes, I know that's all public knowledge, trimming the fat probably isn't a horrible idea. And I speak on behalf of every parent I know when I say we're all fighting the technology fight, particularly at the elementary school level. I think the less time our children spend on these Chromebooks and the apps and the IXL, it absolutely replaces human interaction, which has already suffered. I don't see why we would take a pen and paper away from a kid with a face-to-face teacher to replace it with an app, with Epic, with all of there's a library full of books. My kids bring home books from the library. They don't even read them. Oh, I have to read on Epic. The computers need to go. I hope they do. There's no longer a need for online learning. These kids are so irresponsible. My children are taking pictures on the bus. It's a mess. I certainly don't think there should be room in the budget for these apps when we have people. But thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks, Lauren.
Good evening, Dr. Dolan and the board and parents here and home watching. I'm Katja Armato, Brookville. I'm just following up on an email I sent the board on February 3rd after the last meeting, which unfortunately I wasn't able to attend when the budget was presented, asking about, my question is about the buses. And I don't know if that, I'm sorry I came in late. I don't know if that was discussed today or if it will be discussed in the next meeting. My question is, I have two questions. One is, why wasn't the proposed electric buses a separate proposition? Why is it part of the budget? If it could be its own individual item, and the voting on that should not affect the current budget that supports our kids' education and the teachers. And two, has the board have any discussion further on the IP and IB program after the meeting that we had when Dr. Titone presented, the current situation of that program at the high school, current enrollment, which I believe is lower than ideal.
Sorry, let me do the buses first. The board has asked me for some additional information on the buses as well, and I, as you may have heard, at this point it's still a proposal. I will be providing that information. I anticipate that if we have that work session, it's going to be one of the key items that we discuss. And on the 24th, before the board were to adopt the budget, there would be additional information offered to the community on that specific component of the budget. IB and AP, I believe, at the end of the meeting, the evening that it was the second meeting that it was presented, I believe that the board endorsed the recommendation of the administration in continuing a hybrid approach of keeping both the IB and AP program alive at the high school. Okay. And that's the way that we're proceeding.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Can I just add one thing about the buses and the separate proposition?
Sure.
So all finances have to go through the budget. If it was going to be a separate issue, it would be done through a capital reserve, and the community would vote to establish a capital reserve, which we've done in the past for various improvements in around the community. And of course, the one that was proposed at the last election cycle, which did not pass, which included athletic improvements and of course lights, which became known as the lights. It was one component, but that was sort of the, I guess, the lightning rod. Sorry. No pun intended.
Right, now the light.
But that doesn't create the funding for it. So it would be set up as a separate proposition that would then establish a fund to put things away for the buses, and that would only be funded through budgetary surplus at the end of the year. So we budget a certain amount, and we try to cover everything, and because we can't ask for more once we were to get that. So at the end of the year, there usually is some surplus because you have to budget in for some contingencies. And then when that money is left over at the end of the year, we can either use it to fund certain capital reserves that have been approved by the community, or refund it to the taxpayers, which was one thing we do as well. There are no current capital reserves open, so that's not a place to put it. We can put money in other reserves, but not a capital reserve. And if it doesn't end up making it into the budget, that is one avenue that could be, not for this year, I wouldn't think, but going forward as a way to save, because districts can't save money in the way that we might. We have to. Yeah, it all has to be allocated. It has to be allocated, and you can build in that account again if it's voter approved. And even the expenditure from that account has to be voter approved. So you may have noticed in the past when you went to the polling place, we would sometimes vote just to spend money that's already in there, because it all has to be done, T's crossed and I's dotted by the community vote.
So if the board decides that the budget is an item that should be on the budget, will it then become a proposition for us to raise money or have capital reserves in order to implement it?
Theoretically, that's all on the table. I think in practical terms, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. If it doesn't make it in this year's budget, then I don't think there would be the time to create a separate capital reserve for it this year, not just logistically, but also to your point, which I think is a really good one. When we have these propositions, they are literally called referenda. It's for the community to come together and speak about those things and say what they want. Last year, when we had that capital reserve put out there, we had high turnout and people came and spoke about that vote. And I think the message was that the community did not want lights on that field. At least that's one big takeaway from it, which I could admit personally it was disappointing, but
It was very disappointing. I think a lot of parents were misinformed by how that was proposed. I think there was a lot of community talk that was outside coming. That's why these meetings are so important. That's why it's important for everybody to ask questions, to be very clear on how everything is being allocated and where the money is being spent, because all the parents that I've spoke to this year so far are for lights, no buses. So my second question to you would be, is there a way, is any talk in the board of maybe bringing a proposition again this year or next year to put in lights? Because that's something that would benefit all students, not just some that take the bus. And, I don't really see, it's a great idea, the electric buses. In a perfect world, it's beautiful. And I think it's on the long term, every school is going to have it. I just don't think for this budget, personally, that is the right time to be doing electric buses. I think there are more important things. For me, I would vote for lights before buses. So is the board talking at all about possibly doing that?
I raised the possibility of doing a capital reserve, not just for lights, but for the athletic projects that didn't pass, or maybe one separately for athletic projects, because I think when we did the bond, we didn't really have a good look at the athletics. The athletic issues were not raised, which is why the capital reserve was put out there. And I do think that there is a demand in the community for better athletic facilities. Unfortunately, the construction steering committee didn't feel like they had sufficient enough time to prepare for a capital reserve, because you have to do the estimation on the cost and you have to include escalation. You have to identify the projects and you have to cost them out. You have to include the escalation. It's a time-consuming process, and being in the middle of the bond project, they didn't think that they could put the information together in a timely manner where it would be well explained to the community. And I do think that was part of the problem with the capital reserve the last time. I don't think it was properly explained to the community as a whole. Just time considerations. It came sort of at the tail end. So we thought it was better. The construction steering committee, the consensus on the construction steering committee was to put that aside for this year. And that will be something perhaps the construction steering committee can take up in the next cycle in preparing for our budget. There wasn't enough time this year.
And if I could add to that, Trustee Russo is absolutely right. We did talk about the time constraints on putting a proposition together and properly educating everybody, because I'm hearing what you're saying, and although I wasn't here, I've heard from many people that proposition last year was perhaps misunderstood. I've heard several people say, I would have voted for that. I didn't understand that. So for that reason, it was also my recommendation that this year we keep the budget as a budget vote. You may have heard it only passed by 17 votes last year. You may have even heard that tonight. And I think it's really critically important that if this board wants to move ahead with a proposition, that we need to garner support around a budget first and demonstrate that this is a community that supports the schools in just a straight up and down fashion. And that's one of the reasons why I think we need to keep this ballot, this particular May ballot, clean on the school budget.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Other comments from the public?
Natasha Gordon Seacliff. I would just like to say in support of the buses that when you're talking about ways to save money and look long term at the spending, I don't think electric buses they're not pie in the sky anymore. If we're going to save this planet, we have to start doing this stuff, and we're going to have to do it anyway. And you figured out a way to do it that will cost us the least amount of money. And will save us money over the long term and generate income. And I think it's easy to look at the bottom line today, but if we project out into the future, I think there's a big savings. And when we're talking about saving money, that seems like something that the community should be all for as opposed to against. I don't think it's lights versus busing. I think this is a way to save costs over the long term, and that's how it should be viewed, in addition to all the other benefits that it brings. I'd also like to thank Dr. Dolan for his email today explaining the status of the various lawsuits against the district and how they're being resolved. I think a lot of people don't have that information, and maybe it's something that should become part of the superintendent's updates. I mean, I know you can't talk specifically about lawsuits that are ongoing, but just in terms of whether they exist and when they're resolved and whose favor they're resolved. Because I think it's very educational, and it's very frustrating when we're sitting here talking about saving money to hear that we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars defending these lawsuits that the district is winning, and that so far there's no evidence that anybody's doing anything wrong. So that's another way we could be paying for the buses. Thanks.
Thank you, Natasha. With regard to the buses, I think I would just say that it's clear from this board that regardless of how we feel about the health effects and the environmental effects and the long-term planning, I think the analogy that has been most salient to the board is that years ago we invested in our bus depot, and that was a way of, it certainly had some initial costs, but by now it's paid for itself and continues to pay for itself in perpetuity. And I think, yes, again, as a business person, sometimes you have to make that investment for the long-term benefit. And I think that's probably the metric by which the board will ultimately evaluate the failure or the success of the buses. Again, I'm not going to speak here about the relative benefits of electric buses for health or for the environment or for maintenance costs or fuel costs, et cetera. But it really does come down to whether that investment we will be able to feel will be secure enough to know that it's going to pay for itself and then provide benefits in perpetuity financially. Thank you. Other,
Just one quick
yeah.
It should be noted that the bus depot, the original bus depot, was very controversial in the community when it was first proposed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that we have an analysis showing that it's paid for itself. I mean, I certainly think that having our own drivers and our own buses is a benefit to the community. We control who the drivers are. We control the routes. Whether it's paid for itself or not, I don't know. I don't know that I've ever seen that financial analysis. And it may well have. I'm not saying it has or it hasn't. But it certainly has provided certain benefits.
That's fair. Andrew, when you spoke earlier, and Marianne, when you're speaking, obviously, given what's going on tonight, the last thing I want to do is get in any more confrontations with anybody, period. But we also spent a lot of time on our policies tonight, and one of those policies is that during public comment, it's not a moment for trustees to all pitch in, and it's not a moment for discussion amongst the trustees. For better or worse, I am chosen to be the spokesperson for the board, and so I would ask the fellow trustees to be respectful of our policies that we do spend so much time working through for the facilitation of the meeting. Other questions and comments? Sorry, not questions and comments, public comments. Thank you.
So Lisa Cashman, Seacliff. So I came with a particular comment, but given the exchange that went on earlier this evening and some other previous comments, I've changed my direction entirely. And, I would say that there's some very experienced board members in this room, and during this budget process, and also previous candidates who have run for election, there are people who have come here and have said that they don't feel like their voices are being heard. And it's so frustrating because we have this opportunity twice a month to have our voices heard. So, I really would love to save money as a family, and I would love to pay less for education, and I would love to see some proposals about how to do it and not hurt education here. And so I've heard so much about that it's unsustainable tonight, I've heard, and I've heard that there's a problem over and over again. And I heard last budget season vote no, and that, that our budget is in crisis. But I have yet to hear a proposal that is meaningful about how to do it. Tonight I heard a couple things about some administrative costs that maybe we could have efficiencies of. But, it would be so nice to see. I am a fierce advocate for our schools. I have been for years, but I'm not a blind advocate. And I've looked, and we've gone line by line through the budget, and I'm not willing, and I hope as a district we have made a commitment to provide
really robust opportunities for all learners at every segment of the population. When we compare some of these, you mentioned a bunch of different districts when you were talking about the cost per student, Trustee Russo, and some of these districts are very highly rated, but they're also gatekeepers to opportunities to keep those ratings, and we don't do that here. But yet, we're now in a position where we have the best elementary schools in the state, high schools that are nationally recognized. My kid is in the middle school, and the opportunities that she's presented with, she is learning things about what she loves to learn about that she didn't even know existed. So, yes, let's find ways to cut costs, please. But let's not forget that we have something special here. So the preservation of that is important.
I'm going to respond to that because I think she's mischaracterizing
Marianne,
mischaracterizing what I
Marianne,
was
that's just
saying.
not what we do. Come
I
on.
started
Please adhere
when I said, because I'm being mischaracterized, when I brought the
just not
information
the way to do
forward,
this,
when I
Marianne.
brought the information forward, I said the reality is that we would never get down to the same number as Manhasset without significant
Marianne, we all
program
could defend the
cuts,
things
and
that we have to say.
are not.
People have a right from our community to come up and not be bullied when they
I'm
come
not
to
bullying
speak.
her. I'm just correcting obviously the misimpression.
That's not how these meetings
But
operate,
that is
Marianne.
that is what is happening.
So you're saying you want to do it, and I can't stop you, so you're just going to do it?
Yeah, I'm going to say I'm not going to be misrepresented. That's what I'm going to
I guess
say.
I'll let you do it. What am I going to do?
I heard you say that Manhasset, that we were not going to get down to that cost per
Yeah,
student.
I
I
did.
just heard you list a bunch of places that also do things that I wouldn't want our district to do.
Right.
And they have efficiencies and they cost less. And also as a rebuttal, I would say that we will always have a high cost per student because we have a low census. And there is a threshold for providing world-class education and opportunities for students. There is a cost threshold that is associated with that will, if we want to provide robust opportunities, we have to provide that. And we have a low census, we will always have a high cost per student. It will always be the case. Does it have to be as high as it is? Maybe no. Like, could we find costs? I would love to save money.
I think that's what I said when I started it off. That's exactly what I said. I said we're at the higher end. We would never get down to that number without significant changes to our programs, which I don't think the community would support.
It's just interesting because, we now are in a situation where there's a tax cap. But we got into this problem when there was no tax cap. Like, I looked at the history of the district, and there's 6% increase, 8% increase, 12% increases. And now we can depend, like, all the people who live here can depend that there will never be a scholastic increase over 3%. We know this. So, the sustainability, our taxes are going to go down ever? No, it would be nice if they did. I would love that. That's what I can say. Good night.
I appreciate it. And I can only say that I don't want anyone to feel that they can't come to this podium and say whatever it is that they want to say without having to have pushback from individual trustees. It's just not the way this is supposed to go. So I will now ask anyone else who'd like to come and speak. I think for the folks from this community who've spoken on a range of issues, as we usually have, everyone was treated with respect and allowed to say what they had to say. And that's the way we run these meetings. With that, because I don't see anyone else getting up to speak, we're going to move on to action item 11, which is approval of a transportation contract. Is there a motion on action item 13? Motion. 13, lucky number 13. I heard a motion. Did I hear a second? I'll ask for a second. Thank you. Any questions or comments?
Just an explanation of the board. This literally arrived at about 2 o'clock this afternoon. I think at our last meeting we approved a contract that involved a piggyback clause, if you'll remember, with the district. And unfortunately, that district is unable to complete that obligation. So literally 2 o'clock today, we got word that we needed to approve this, hence the word emergency. It is only good for 30 days. The resolution is carefully written and make sure that it verifies that it is an emergency and there is an end date on there So you will see material a lot like this again in another month.
Thank you. Other questions or comments before we vote? Okay, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Aye. Action item 14, which has two parts. It's the approval of resolutions for Phase 2 bond work. One is the rejection of bids for Phase 2, and one is the award for other bids in Phase 2. So I'll take a motion to open discussion on both 14A and B. Is there that motion? I heard a second as well. I'm sitting right between them, Betty. I can't tell who went first, so. Okay, thank you. Another reason to go to the videotape. Are there any questions or comments on these bids for Phase 2 bond work? Okay, all in favor? Aye. We're now moving on to item 15, which is old business. Is there any old business from our trustees?
Yes, I have a couple, please.
Please go for it.
Let me get my notes out.
I'll just get right into the mic.
Yes,
there.
I'm just mumbling and I have to get my notes out. Okay,
Okay.
here I am. The first one is just a quick item. Dave, I think it was you in our last meeting mentioned that we have an outstanding FOIL request about the real property FOIL request regarding the probable removal from the tax rolls of a particular property. I just wondered if we'd gotten any update on the status of that.
Yeah,
Have they answered the FOIL
Before we have
request?
the answer, just clarify for the community, there was a tax shift. There was a law that says you can't have more than 1% of the tax burden transfer between one property tax class and another. We have 4 property tax classes here in Long Island: individual homes, co-ops and condos, businesses, and utilities, and they can't transfer more than 1% from one section to the other unless there is a removal of a piece entirely from the tax roll. So we saw a big chunk move out of the utility class, and we're trying to find out why. So I was just giving some context before you answer the
Thank
question.
you. And no, we do not have an answer yet, and it's extremely frustrating, as diligent as we are in answering FOILs, that when we FOIL the county for this information, that we don't get answers. I will follow up tomorrow with DHC. They're the ones that have really been working on this, and Olivia and I have been diligent. We do think we know what the property is. I don't want to predict it, but I kind of think it's an obligation on the county's part to tell us why people's taxes went up last year more than the base number that our tax levy was, and I don't remember that number, 1.47, I think.
It was 1.404 last
okay,
year.
1.404, and yet some people's taxes went up more because a piece of property was taken away from the utilities and passed along to homeowners, out of our control. I will follow up, Trustee Muska, and I'll see if we can get an answer, and it is
Thank you.
frustrating.
Thank you. I just had one more fairly quick item.
Sure.
I just wanted to tee up a request that will be coming to the board from the Legislative Action Committee. As we heard earlier, the committee has identified April 11th as our not yet publicly announced, although it is, I guess, in this second publicly announced, as our legislative night. And the committee's actually, now pulling together what we want, the issues list that we want to discuss and questions, and doing so by reviewing the priorities that this board gave the committee back in the fall. So I'll be circling back based on that. We'll come up with a draft. I'll be circling back to all of you with that proposed list and asking the board to, look at it and consider it. Let the committee know of any suggestions or changes or comments or otherwise within some reasonable time frame following that. Just wanted to put that out there so we can know to expect it.
That's great. I'm just going to echo one part of that for the video. April 11th, our local legislators will be coming, and
Public event
Public
in the
event.
evening. I believe almost certainly at Glenwood Landing Auditorium. But,
great. It's quite a room. Okay, other old business? Trustee Colasiopa?
I just wanted to see if we had or could have a discussion about the traffic policy and the traffic. I know Dr. Dolan, you shared the traffic policy with us from 2007, and I read through it. And I'm just not sure if we actually implemented, since it was so long ago, I'm not sure which pieces were implemented and which weren't. So I was just wondering if maybe you could look into that and clarify, and then just, without rearranging the design of all of our schools, parking lots and driveways, and, without spending millions and millions of dollars, I'm just wondering if there are some solutions that we could come up with for alleviating the traffic.
So, not having been here, I don't know what it was like before, but I will certainly follow up. And I think I saw John Hall around here somewhere. I'm not gonna. There he is. Or at least there's John Hall's left hand. I will not buttonhole him right now, but John and I will certainly sit and talk, and we could probably generate some thoughts. And some have been presented, and I think some of them in that study. So before I continue, let me follow up with John, and we'll get you some information.
Okay. And just one other issue that I had brought up at the last meeting was just the athletic uniforms. I was just wondering, again, you don't have to give me an answer today, but I know you said you would speak to Don Lang about, I know we had a line in the budget that included uniforms, but just wanted to make sure that we're getting our students, athletes, the correct sizes and new uniforms when they're needed.
I had a conversation with Don. He thought the amount that was in the budget was appropriate for what he wanted to accomplish, and I hadn't heard the size issue. Occasionally a kid will get a shirt or a pair of shorts that are too big or too small, but we thought we had the right sizes. But certainly the article in the paper got our attention, and we'll be diligent about it. And as a regular attendee at games, I'm seeing uniforms that I think are appropriate, but Don is certainly in the driver's seat in terms of making those decisions, and he knows it.
Thank you, Lisa. Other old business from our trustees? Is there any new business from our trustees? I would just like to ask at some point, Tom, if there would be a moment or an opportunity at a future board meeting to recognize CASA for the work they've been doing as a partner to the district.
Having worked with them this year, I'd love to. They've done some really important work, and it's amazing to me that the conversations that I had with them way back in July and August about fentanyl are now appearing on the national scene in ways that make me really appreciate the work that they've done. I do know we've got potentially another event coming up with them. They just do great work, but yes, I will make certain that we have the CASA board here to thank them for the thing that, it sounds hyperbolic, and I apologize, but for saving lives. For saving lives. We don't know the value of their work, because the value of their work isn't seen except in the tragedies that don't occur. So good for them.
Absolutely. Thank you. Other new business before we adjourn? I'd like to ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor of calling it a night? Aye. Thank you, trustees.